Welcome to this Womanship Share More, Worry Less Truthcast, where through anonymous interviews, we help women share more of their stories without fear of embarrassment or judgment, as well as worry less through our conversations with wellness professionals who can support us with the challenges we face across many areas of our life. There's so much information out there on how we take care of our bodies, but how often do we see information on how to take care of our vaginas? How many of you have used a mirror to check yours recently? Let's face it, we're not even very good at using the words vagina or vulva, let alone understanding our vaginal health. With 34% of women still too embarrassed to talk about their vaginal health conditions and concerns. But as women, we need to get rid of the shame we have around our bodies. When I first started researching into menopause, there was one symptom from the ever-expanding list that scared me more than any other, and that was vaginal dryness. And once you find out about it, you can't forget about it. So for a while, all I could think about before sex was, is it going to happen now? And as if the thought of vaginal dryness wasn't terrifying enough, I then found out about vaginal atrophy. I know exactly how I reacted when I first heard those words, because I see it replayed on the faces of every woman I've mentioned it to. Shock, as they try to process what those two words actually mean. Unlike symptoms of the menopause, like hot flashes, which vary hugely between women, vaginal atrophy is a physiological change, so it's likely to affect many of us. In fact, research estimates vary from between 50 to 80%. And why do you think those figures vary so much? Because many women suffer in silence, through embarrassment, or thinking that it's a natural part of the aging process that they cannot do anything about. So I was delighted when our guest today approached Womanship to share her story about her 10-year journey with vaginal atrophy. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for this chat.
Thank you.
So, as you're going to tell us your story, can you paint us a little bit of a picture about who you are as a person, as you're the main character in your life story?
Yeah, I can. I am 52 years old. I have a career in corporate world. I have no kids. I live by myself. I think my friends describe me as a loyal, nice person. I always find I like hanging out with girlfriends, like really talk about girly stuff and sex and things. But I equally like hanging out with men. I have a lot of male friends, which is different dynamics. Which I like the balance. You know, like really tough jokes and yeah, just I like hanging out both with men and women.
Nice. And what do you do when you're not working? What do you do for fun?
Various things. I like doing sports, boxing. I do language course. I like to travel. I've just done some studies. Trying to keep myself busy.
Okay, thank you. So, why are you going to talk to us today about vaginal atrophy, and why did you decide to do so anonymously?
I like to share it because I've been struggling with it. You were saying in the intro, 10 years. It's actually, I think, 13
Oh,
years,
wow.
nearly 13, yeah, because it started when I was 40, and I'm 52 now. So I think right now it's part of like what you were saying as well. It's part of the list when you look up menopausal symptoms. It's definitely it says vaginal dryness or atrophy, but back then it wasn't, and I suffered for many years. Even my GP and gynecologist I saw back in 2013, like no one ever made a link or asking me if I had any other menopausal symptoms, or maybe they thought I was too young because I was early 40s. So it took until 2018, when I was 47, for me actually to find the diagnosis online, like
Wow.
where it said vaginal atrophy. So I want to create awareness with women. And the reason why I'm doing it anonymously is that it's a bit double because yes, I do want to share the story and make women aware, but my job is very in a world with many males and millennials, and I always try to keep work and private separate. And I do want to speak openly also about my sex life, so I don't feel comfortable going out with this being on social media or people linking it to me.
I think that makes perfect sense. And the thing that I hope with these conversations and the anonymity is that women can actually, like yourself, can actually share more of the details and more of the truth of their experience without, as we said, fear of embarrassment or judgment. So before you tell us about your experience and journey with this, maybe you can explain exactly what vaginal atrophy is.
Yeah, vaginal atrophy is basically when your body starts producing less or almost no more estrogen, which happens when your period stops. The vagina walls become thinner. In general, also they say, I've read somewhere that in the first 5 years after your last period, also your collagen drops. So collagen is everywhere in your body,
Right.
not just like we're always worried about our wrinkles or hair or nails, but it's also around your joints, but yeah, also inside of us. And because of the vaginal walls becoming thinner, they become more prone to, for instance, yeast or other infections. But also, it can be painful or like a burning sensation. And this is not just after or during having sex. This can also just be there. So wearing like skinny jeans or cycling or just having like this constant like painful, irritated, burning feeling. It's
Wow, it doesn't sound pleasant at all. But it's
no.
interesting. You said that it's something that happens once your periods have stopped. But you said that you started having experience with this at 40. So did you have an early menopause? Or
So I had my last period 2 months before I turned 48. So I don't think officially it's called like early menopause, but if I read like they're saying average, women have their last period around their 52. I think I was early, even though it's not like they're not saying it's women who get it in their 30s. They say that's early menopause, but and now it's quite interesting because now it's like 12 years onwards. I can actually look back and I can really see the timeline. But the problem started definitely when I was 40. I also looked back in some referral letters from the GP to the gynecologist, so I could check the dates. And I think you know how they're saying like some women get like premenopausal symptoms and it starts with like lack of sleep or hot flushes, and in the beginning they sometimes don't link it.
yes.
And for me this has been my most menopausal and premenopausal symptom that just wasn't picked up neither by myself nor by doctors for a long time.
Wow. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey and the symptoms that you first experienced and how they developed?
Yeah. So it's at the time. So when I was 40, I was not in a relationship, but I did have like a steady lover with friend with benefit. And I first realized that because I would usually have sex in the weekend, that's when I would see him, that I would have issues and irritation after sex. So this went on for a while. I would go to my GP and he would test me for yeast infections or STDs, and all those tests were always negative. So then it would go away. Then at some point, I also started noticing that I would get the same irritation and burning sensation without having had sex just before. So, and then I started seeing this pattern where I would get this in a few days before I would get my period. And then the minute I would get my period, it would be gone.
Right.
So I was like, and it's funny because I did mention this also to the doctor and saying, I think it's hormonal, but I was thinking hormonal as in my cycle. I never thought pre-menopause. And so this went on. Then at some point I started out of nowhere, out of the blue, I started getting small tears in the vulva. So the outside of the vagina is called vulva. I know sometimes people are confused.
Especially women. We don't know what
Yeah.
different pieces are called, which is really strange.
Yeah. So I would get like these small cuts, like tears. So I went back to the GP again, and I said, "Look, I really want to see a gynecologist." So he referred me to one. And at the time, I even went back to the referral letters and the letters that went back from the gynecologist to the GP. They did speak about, or the GP was asking, like, oh, maybe it's lichen sclerosis, which I will speak more about in a minute. But yeah, none of these doctors, neither the GP or the gynecologist, ever asked about any other symptoms I might be having, which I think at some point around my 43rd, 44th year, I was starting to get like a little bit like night sweats or issues with sleeping, which also I didn't link for a while, but they didn't ask. So yeah, so then and because it went and it went up and down, so they never really diagnosed anything officially. And then it came back really heavily in hindsight. This was around my very last period, and it didn't go away for, I think, for about 3 months. Yeah, and it's really difficult, especially work at a very high level, and I don't know if it's very like anything in your genital area is, yeah, is just awful to have that constantly, and you're having to perform, and yeah, it just makes you feel really, it does something to your self-esteem, and it makes you very literally itchy because it feels itchy, right? So
So having to go to work with that and cope with that whilst trying to do a high pressure job must be really difficult.
yeah, I do remember at some point I had to travel for work, and it was a very difficult project. And all I could feel was this constant burning sensation between my legs. So, yeah. So then, eventually, in this period, because it was driving me insane, literally, that's also when I started looking for other solutions. Because at that point, I had also tried synthetic local hormones, which actually I stopped within a few days. They made it even worse. The irritation was so bad. It gave me a hot flush. I only ever had one hot flush during the day, and that was from that treatment. So
And that's an estrogen cream. So that's a locally applied estrogen cream.
yeah, it's the cream that you apply on the outside, and with a little tube you can insert into the vagina. But yeah, for me it didn't work. I kind of realized that I always knew that the synthetic hormones did not work for me, because when I was 20 or 21, I tried various birth control pills, and they literally made me sick.
Right.
I had diarrhea and vomiting, so I stopped them. And then the rest of my life, always fertile life, always looked for other birth control types that were without hormones.
It's so important, I think, that as women we learn these things about our bodies, so that we can help get the right course of treatment. So
Yeah.
knowing that you have a low tolerance to the synthetic hormones, I think, is something that a lot of women aren't aware that they can have that
Yeah.
reaction to it.
Well, I made the link when I found out the local hormone treatments for the vaginal atrophy didn't work. I was like, oh, actually, I remember I didn't go well 25 years ago with synthetic hormones either.
So why do you think it took so long for your condition or the vaginal atrophy to be diagnosed?
Well, I live in the Netherlands, just like you, and I think for like I was saying earlier, like now, if you Google list of pre or menopausal symptoms, the vaginal issues are listed, but back then, like 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it wasn't. It was like the standard symptoms, like hot flushes, weight gaining, all these things. And then in the Netherlands, it was only last year, 2022, when the guidelines for the Dutch GPs were actually amended regarding menopause. And the GPs, kind of, because they're general practitioners, right? They work off guidelines for each symptom, not just menopause. And I think, yeah, if it's not in the guidelines, and that's kind of their manuals, right? So and I've heard also other women where their premenopausal symptoms were not addressed properly. So I think that is probably a big thing. Another thing I read was that one of a Dutch gynecologist was saying that only in 2020, so 3 years ago, the Society of Dutch Gynecologists acknowledged or actually stated within their group, saying menopause has been neglected in healthcare for many years. So we're talking 3 years, and last year. 3 years.
Such a common thing when it comes to women's health. I know in the UK they passed a bill regarding women's health, I think last year, and it was that all doctors in their studies by the year 24-25 would have to study an elective in women's health. And I remember reading the news and thinking, so they haven't had to study women's health before. So it's no wonder that I think so many women experience health issues that aren't taken seriously by their doctor because they've never had to actually study them as conditions and take them seriously.
No, I've read something similar in interviews with gynecologists here that, I don't think in medical school it's addressed properly.
So we talked about how it affected your life at work. How did it affect your personal life and your sex life?
Maybe just to describe my sex life before. I've always really enjoyed sex. I know there's some women that struggle with that, but I was actually lucky enough that even in my early 20s, I really hit it off. For some reason, I always had sex partners where I clicked really well in bed. Maybe not so much in other areas. But, they say you can't have everything. But so I either was in relationships or with like this other person I was talking about earlier, a friend with benefits. But yeah, the sex was always great. So I always enjoyed it. My libido was high. So then around my mid 40s, when I really started to have the issues, unfortunately, like slowly the relationship I had with this friend with benefit for many years kind of died down. And then fast forward a little bit, we also had COVID. So as a single person, it was really hard for 2-3 years to actually go out and date. Or so then at some point about year and a half ago, I decided to actually have sex with a gigolo, which was something which was on my bucket list for many years, and I just never got around it. Also because I can say it's not very cheap. But then I was like,
hang on, you can't skip over that bit. We've got to dig into that bit a little bit more.
I was going to tell you, So I then decided with the vaginal atrophy, I was like, now it's COVID. I haven't had sex for a while. I don't know how it feels, and I was a bit scared, so to say, to kind of just go on Tinder, drag someone off Tinder, and then like, hey, by the way, we need to take this slowly because I have this problem down there. And so I thought, you know what? I always wanted to have paid sex once in my life, so this is actually great. So I called this agency that I had been looking on their website for many years. They're quite well known, especially here in the Netherlands, and I think now they operate even throughout Europe. So I knew they were like not like some sleazy agency or someone, just the one person that offers himself for paid sex online. So I called the owner and I explained my problem or what I wanted, and basically said, I'm in menopausal age now due to COVID. I haven't had sex, so I really want to kind of experience this, but also like be able, you buy a service to be able to tell it. It's like you go to the hairdresser. It's like not too short. I want bangs. Like this is the same. I pay for the service. So.
And it was obviously on your mind the fact that the sex could be painful and that you needed to take it slow. So you wanted that to be taken into account.
Yeah. So when I explained this to him over the phone, the owner of the agency, he wasn't surprised at all. And he kind of said, oh, we get this question regularly. So
that must have been a relief as well to realize that you weren't the only person in that position.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Yeah. And it was also interesting because apparently people also have sex with gigolos. For instance, if you have a really bad experience, like if you've been raped and you're scared, like it's quite interesting. I didn't realize this either. So I told the owner, I said, look, I don't want some buffed up 25-year-old. I want someone a little bit my age, in his 40s. So, and he sent me 3 proposals because not everyone is on their website.
Right.
And one of them, immediately I thought, this is someone that I probably would swipe on Tinder or Bumble, whatever. So yeah, long story short, I went for the full thing. I was like, okay, if I'm spending this much money, then let's go to a hotel and not do it in my own home. And yeah, it was actually quite good. I mean, I did it. We first had a drink in the hotel bar. I did explain to him, and it was very easy. It was actually a very good experience. I was a bit, I mean, it went very well. I was a bit shocked. I did have two small tears
Right.
in the vulva area. So that I found shocking, like to realize, because we started slowly, but very
Yeah.
quickly, everything was
Sex happens.
whack. And that, yeah, we just went in a moment, which I was really happy with, but it was still shocking because like when you were younger, of course, you couldn't do this, days the next day again. Like now it's like I could not have done it again, like
Yes.
the next day. So
And was it painful?
no, no, and it was I because the other thing I think is sometimes a bit confusing because when they speak about vaginal dryness, it's good to realize that the vaginal dryness in menopause does not mean that you cannot become wet anymore when you're aroused. It only they say it will take longer because of the thinning vagina walls. But so it's two different things, which I think is a bit confusing. So
Right.
vaginal dryness doesn't mean that your vagina is dried up and you can only have sex with lubricant. It just means it's drier, but you can when you're getting aroused, you can still get it wet.
As I said at the beginning, when I read vaginal dryness, it terrified me. So I think that's really important for women to realize as well, that when they
Yeah,
hear that, it doesn't have to be a huge negative. It's just
yeah.
understanding what it could mean in your sex life.
Yeah. No, and they also say that when we were younger, with the estrogen levels still being normal, I don't know about you, but for me, like sometimes it was very nice just to have a quickie. But you could, you didn't need any like foreplay. It was just like,
We're in the mood. Let's
up
do
the skirts
it.
and but the interesting thing is because you were always like ready to go, whereas now you actually need foreplay. You need to make sure you're wet, and doctors do say like, oh, you should not have dry sex and don't even use a lubricant if you're dry. But yeah, I also think you need something to start, right?
So how has sex been since that point
um it's
with
no
partners that you've
longer,
had?
yeah, it's no longer spontaneous. The last time I had sex a few months ago, I was also shocked, and I needed to at some point stop the sex because it was hurting. And I ended up with two small tears inside the vagina, which took about a week to heal. So yeah, I mean, I haven't had sex since, so this is a few months ago. So yeah, it's difficult because especially as a single woman, because a lot of the things that you read on websites by sexual therapists or gynecologists, they will always speak about yeah, if you have this issue, like speak to your partner and start to look for other kind of ways of having sex and less focus on penetration. But I cannot find anywhere where anyone gives any advice like how to deal with this as a single person. Like,
Who's dating? So in other words, not only do you have to have the connection with that person, it's also then, I guess, the fact that you have to explain what's happening before you get into what is previously a spontaneous
yeah,
moment.
yeah, and I think it's also because I mean. Um, Tell me any man that especially if you meet someone new, right? Like for men, sex is usually about penetration. So if that is harder, yeah, it's difficult. And it's also like I mean, with the paid gigolo, I felt it was easier. But like, let's say I go out and date again and you meet someone you like, and yeah, I think you would probably have to say this very early on. But yeah, the whole spontaneity is kind of gone. And with me, when I was younger, like I always liked playing with my sexiness and flirting, and I had a lot of attention from men when I was younger. And yeah, it's kind of gone, and it feels like this whole side of me is dying. And sometimes I feel like, is my libido lower because sex is a bit more difficult, and sometimes even painful, or is it just lower because of the hormones? They also say if you don't have sex for a while, like the libido will also you kind of die down. And I'm
Yes.
not ready yet to give up on it. So that's why I keep like trying, and also keep working on solutions, on treatments, because I'm 52. I could live another 30 years. I only had about 20, say maximum 25 years of nice sex like that, and now it's gone. I can't accept that.
And it's such a difficult time for women, I think, through so many things, as you said, through whether they're hormonal or through something like this, they feel that their sex life decreases. I have a friend of mine who suffers from the same thing. And I remember her describing it as like, a knife being put inside her. And I can only imagine how you would be terrified of actually wanting to do that from something that was pleasurable becoming painful.
Yeah. No, I sometimes, I joke, but I sometimes feel like maybe I should like join the other team, right? And start having sex with women where there's less focus on penetration. But yeah, I did experiment a lot with sex when I was younger. So, and I'm definitely not a lesbian. So yeah, I want to try and see if I can get back to sex with men.
And enjoying it, being able to enjoying it fully. So let's talk about some of the solutions that are available, and what has worked for you. And just to be clear, we're not doctors, we're not providing medical advice, but sharing the experience and knowledge of our guest, having personally experienced this.
Yeah. Well, I think if you would ask gynecologists, the first thing they would say, and the thing that probably works the best, is these local hormones. But yeah, for me, they didn't work. But they say that is actually that if you use it for a while, it will make the vagina walls thicker because you actually apply estrogen back again where it's gone.
And I think that's one of the really good pieces of news in terms of women suffering for this, or maybe suffering in silence. This is actually something that we can repair.
Yeah. Although I've also read a lot, both on like Dutch websites or American websites. Even though they say the local hormones will give you no side effects, I've seen a lot of women report side effects like hot flushes, dark moods, hair loss. So it's yeah, maybe it doesn't work for all women. Like for me, it definitely didn't work.
Yes.
Also, it seems that the base of these kind of creams sometimes have like irritants in them that will irritate the vagina. So maybe that makes it also difficult to kind of judge, is that the irritants or is there something in the cream that they add that you get irritation from, or is it the hormones? Yeah.
It's weird how it feels like there's so little research in terms of getting these products right.
Yeah, I also think I started saying recently to people, like, imagine if vaginal atrophy was a male problem as well, right? So trying to explain this to a man, it's like, okay, so because your testosterone, which is the male hormone for men, because your testosterone slowly goes down, which does happen.
Yes.
So you start to have problems with the foreskin of your penis, and it starts to be irritated, and you have this burning sensation, and not just because you just had sex, just in general. And then after a while, you get small cuts in your foreskin. So by then, I think you've lost men, and they go like, "Oh, I don't want to hear anymore," and they're putting their hands on top of their ears. But I feel like, I think you mentioned this also in your interview with the lady from Mama Moon. In general, which is true, right? The medical world and research for medication for many years has been focused on the white male.
Yes.
It's the same with coronary diseases, etc. So I think that's only now slowly starting to pick up. And yeah, I think it's probably. I do feel like if men would have this, maybe there was a better product on the market, and one with less irritants, or
they would have sold it by now. I mean, there's no way they would have
gone
through, exactly. There's no way they would have gone through this discomfort. And I think this is the problem. That women aren't taken seriously when they go to doctors with various different complaints, but also that they don't go to the doctor with these complaints. And the statistics that I spoke about at the beginning is women just aren't confident to go and talk about the vagina and problems they're having with their vaginas, or even other things they experience. And we need to get better as women at realizing our bodies are a natural part of us, and we have to pay attention and take care of them, and we shouldn't be embarrassed.
No, and I think especially vaginal issues, a lot of women don't want to see a doctor or open their legs and because they feel embarrassed. But I'm like, hey, if there's a problem down there, I want to solve it. And
So that was the creams are one of the solutions that are available. What else is out there?
yeah, so I quickly discovered for me the local hormones didn't work. So I started really diving into solutions that are not hormonal based. One of them is it's like these little capsules that you insert that are based on hyaluronic acid, but they mainly kind of produce like a film. They don't make the vagina walls thicker. They just kind of create like a film of protection.
So it's more like a lubricant, or
Yeah, like a lubricant, but not for sex.
Yes.
But yeah, it just kind of creates like like a protection on it. So, and you would need to like use it for quite a while. The minute you stop using it, if you don't use it for 2 weeks, it's gone. So that one, which I now and then use. Then the other one, which I discovered in 2018, is the vaginal laser. So it's a CO2 laser. So the same kind of laser that is used for your skin, your facial skin. It's a bit controversial if you read about it in the media, because one is that when all these things were invented, of course, in America. So when this came on the market, there were people, and I've read like UK journalists back in the time saying, "Oh, this is ridiculous," like this, the feminist kind of voices. Now women have to also rejuvenate their vaginas because everything in the US is very focused on rejuvenation.
And the power of youth. And basically, it's interesting you say, we focus on our faces and wanting them to be healthy and young, but that should also apply to all of our bodies, including our vaginas.
Yeah, and also it's important to realize that rejuvenation does not necessarily mean like the cosmetic side of it, which I'm sure in the US where everything is based more on your appearance, but because vaginal atrophy in the end, yeah, it's a menopausal problem, but menopausal is aging. So it is a problem, and by rejuvenation, you can also make your life quality better. Not necessarily because you want your vagina to look younger or be tighter.
It's to be healthier, to actually be healthier, and for not to cause you pain and irritation.
Yeah, and I would consider myself also a feminist, and I think in contrary, I think it's a very feminist thing to go and search for treatments so you can continue to have sex and enjoy it
and live a full life.
Yeah.
So you tried this laser treatment?
Yeah. So I'm doing the laser now since 2018. So the first time I needed 3 treatments, once with I think a month apart, and now I go in every year, once a year. The other thing is that there are people, including gynecologists, saying, "Oh, it's not good. It's not good for the skin." But it's interesting, and I've also spoken to a journalist who had interviewed this gynecologist, because I never hear the explanation why they think it's not good. They just say, "Oh, it's not good for the skin. It makes it more like leathery."
Right.
I've discussed this multiple times with the gynecologist where I do the vaginal laser. So I try to hear both sides. I also try to get appointments with the gynecologist who says in the press it's not good, because I really wanted to hear. But yeah, for me, I feel like it works. I think it's also, if you can't use the hormonal treatment, you need to also look for multiple things. So the other thing I've recently discovered about half a year ago is a LED light device. It's produced by a company called Joylux in the US.
Yes, I've heard of them.
Yeah, so I had to go through some steps to actually get one here in the Netherlands. So I ordered it in the UK, picked it up in London, device, and I really read into it because it wasn't cheap, but I think it's definitely cheaper than the laser.
Right.
And the results are good. For me, I think maybe if I had started earlier, I can definitely see a difference. But I can also see that there's small parts that are already, as the vaginal laser gynecologist has explained, at some point, like when the cells are gone, it's really hard to get them back. So certain areas are already not lost, but yeah, what's not there, you cannot fully get back, she has explained to me. So, but I do like the LED light. Showed it to her and she said it's a good combination to use. It's safe. So that one, and then just recently I discovered something which I also discussed with the vaginal laser gynecologist. It's and again it's coming, I think, from the US. It's called the O shots. I think O stands for orgasm, and it's again based on a something they've been doing for facial skin for many years. It's, let me just read it rightly. It's called PRP, and it stands for platelet-rich plasma. So what they do is they draw some blood, they put that in a centrifuge, and then they apply this. So they've been doing that for the face for many years, like a facelift with your own blood. But they also do it now, and again in the US, it's being marketed as it will give you better orgasms. But it's also being used apparently with some people, good results for people that really have lichen sclerosis. So the gynecologist who does the laser said, yeah, it's safe to try, and she even recommended a clinic here in the Netherlands where to go for that. So
That's great. So what is lichen sclerosis? I can't even say it.
yeah, so lichen sclerosis is again something that women can get in or post their menopause. And I hope to God that I will never get. It's actually quite a few steps up from vaginal atrophy, and the, the skin kind of starts to shrink even more, and things start to grow together. And yeah, it's quite painful. They don't have a cure, so all they can provide is like certain topical creams to kind of manage it.
But I guess with any of these things, it's what we were saying at the beginning. It's understanding your vagina, understanding when there's something that doesn't feel right, and actually going and getting it checked out as soon as possible, because that's the best way to make sure that you're not living with something long term.
Yeah. No, and I think what should happen is, because they say, it's good to, if you have any symptoms, go to your doctor, because it could be vaginal atrophy, or it could be lichen sclerosis, or it could eventually develop into that. And I think maybe women need to become, how we've been told over the years, like how we need to study our breast and look for lumps. I think what needs to happen, especially for women, let's say from their 40s, to in the same way, like start feeling your vagina when you're in the shower, start looking with a mirror, because only if you know how it looks, you can actually spot or feel differences, right? And then go to your doctor. The same what women do nowadays days with lumps, right?
I think that's such a great piece of advice. And as I said at the beginning, how many women have actually looked at their vaginas and understand what it looks like, to understand what change means for them personally, because it's so different for all of us. So, any advice that you'd like to give women? I mean, I know you've just given some great advice in terms of making sure that we're checking ourselves and understand our vaginas. But anything else you'd like to tell women regarding vaginal atrophy or checking themselves?
Show to be aware in an early stage, because what I was saying earlier, what the vaginal laser gynecologist recently explained to me is like those cells slowly die, and what's no longer there, you can't revive. Whether it's with vaginal laser or so the earlier you can receive treatment, I think you can probably like maintain more
For longer, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And also I think if for me, I suffered was nearly 8 years before I realized it was vaginal atrophy, and it was actually a menopausal symptom. I think it would have also helped to have known this earlier, just to kind of, because it was so frustrating, and I didn't know what it was, and I kept looking for cures or going back to the doctors just to understand something. I think, to understand what it is would have made it maybe more bearable.
I think it's one of the things that started me on the road to womanship, and it's the lack of understanding we have around our bodies with things like menopause. And for me, it was this moment of thinking, menopause, like death, is going to happen to us in some way, shape, or form. So how do we not know about the symptoms? And again, hearing about vaginal atrophy, for me, it was like, how have I never heard of this? And I can imagine that there are a lot of women out there who feel exactly the same. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'd like to change things slightly and ask you about womanship and what the word womanship means to you.
It's all about as you say as well, it's all about sharing and sharing your experiences, just so other women can be aware. I think especially with menopause, like for instance, I had a friend who's six, or still have a friend who's 6 years older than me, and she has also had a lot of issues with atrophy, and it was actually good to kind of have someone who's a bit ahead in the game, because if you know what could happen, then you can be aware, right? So I feel like it's important for women to have this older friend. So if with this interview I can be like this older friend for women, then that's great.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think that support system that we can create for each other is something that's been really underutilized by women, especially when you think at one point we were living in, the same town or the same village as our sisters and mothers and aunties and grandmothers, where we could actually maybe share more of this information. I think some of that's been lost. So that support we can provide each other, I think, is really important.
And I think it's also important because I think we're the first generation that not only is working full time with menopausal issues, but also, so I got my last period right before my 48th birthday. Let's say I could still live another 40 years. That means half of my life is post-menopausal. Like, you're not going to live 40 years with symptoms. So I think it's important to be more open, because I don't think we should suffer that half of our life.
I was doing some reading beforehand, obviously, to try and learn a bit more about it. And they were saying one of the biggest issues is women, as they get older, going into care homes and actually not having got treatment for this, and then literally having to suffer in pain on top of everything else in the last years of their life. And they think there are a lot of older women who are actually suffering from that. So I think it's really important that now we take care of those things so that when we get older, it's not something that we're having to suffer with even more.
Yeah.
So I love quotes, and I'm just wondering whether, I think they're a great way of shortcutting information and giving some really powerful messages. So do you have a quote that you'd like to share and tell us a little bit about why you're sharing it?
Yeah, I have one that's very specific to this topic, which is use it or lose it. And it's actually a quote that not only the vaginal laser gynecologist has told me, but also I've read in other interviews with gynecologists. So, and especially for the vagina, because the interesting thing is that even though you have issues with vaginal atrophy or in menopause, that you would at first think, oh, the last thing on my mind is actually having sex. But they're saying it's actually good to continue to have sex because traffic down there is good for circulation. They're saying even if you have solo sex, but like make sure that the circulation keeps going. Or even the vaginal laser gynecologist has told me, like, okay, so if you're single or in COVID, like use a dildo, but like keep using the vagina. And also and this is over many years, but let's say if you don't have sex for 10 years and you have vaginal atrophy, what could happen is that the vaginal opening shrinks. So then at some point, if let's say in 10 years you do swipe this amazing man on Tinder and you're trying to have penetrate, you try to be penetrated by him, then, which is, nobody tells you this. So yeah, I think use it or lose it. I need to start practicing this a bit more myself now that we're out of COVID. And it also goes for the brain. Like they say, even in your 50s or 60s, go and learn a new language or try to do something that is difficult for the brain. Because,
and again, it's the whole thing. It's like, we focus on other areas of our bodies, but why is the vagina one that we ignore so much? And the other thing that I remember reading about this topic is also how it causes relationship breakdowns as well, because women aren't confident enough to speak about it to their partners and end up withdrawing from sex because it's painful, not getting it treated, and then it can impact the relationship. So again, it's really important, ladies, to do something about this. If anybody is suffering or sitting there now thinking, maybe this sounds familiar, go to your doctor and get it checked out.
Say, speak up to your doctor and speak up to your man. And maybe it's easier with someone that you have a long relationship with. I don't know. Or sometimes maybe it's easier also with a new person. You just lay down the law. It's like, this is the thing. And then...
But I think it's about sharing more of the things that we go through and just being open and honest that this is a real topic, and lifting the lid off it a little bit.
Yeah, that's definitely a real topic.
So, okay, as these Truthcasts are about sharing more, do you have a question you'd like to ask me? And I'll try and answer it as openly and honestly as possible.
Um, yeah, because I was reading, I think you posted a while ago also on the Womanship platform, about how you struggled with like lower or darker moods because of hormones and menopause. So did you feel like there was also a bit of a taboo, or the same like this vaginal atrophy, or how did you feel like that was like
I
perceived?
completely felt that it was a taboo area. So I did a lot of research into menopause and the symptoms to understand it for myself. I definitely started going into sort of black holes. I really felt, even though I knew that depression symptoms are part of menopause, it's one of the times that antidepressants are most misprescribed, and doctors see the changes, and rather than measure women's hormones, just look at the symptoms. So I really started going into a black hole. And for me, I didn't think I could talk to anybody about it. So if I'd have talked to my partner about it, he would have thought it's about the relationship. And there was nothing wrong with the relationship. If I spoke to my friends about it, and a lot of them are a bit younger than I am, I think they would have put me on suicide watch. So I really was sort of surviving this area, feeling very lost. And then a friend of mine sent me a really simple text message. And she said, Nick, I know I can say this to you because you won't think that I'm crazy, but do you ever wake up in the morning and feel, what's the point? Now, it wasn't like I was going to jump from the top of a high building, but I burst into tears because she summed up exactly how I was feeling. And just to know that somebody else was feeling that exact thing made me feel like I wasn't going crazy. And actually, that was one of the things that really helped lift that feeling, or that helped me crawl out of the black hole, was knowing that I wasn't the only one, knowing that I wasn't mad. So, yeah, I think there are lots of taboo things that we don't talk about. And once you start talking about it, that alone helps us feel better. So I
Yeah.
think it's really important that we talk about things like this.
Yeah, and that doctors become more knowledgeable, because yeah, it's one thing to talk about things between us as friends, but then also doctors need to take these symptoms serious. But I think there's definitely progress now.
And I think, one of the important things I heard, from a doctor is the fact that we go and tell them things and they have to work out what it is that's wrong. And for me, one of the biggest things that we can do is actually do some research before we go to the doctor, really try and describe what our symptoms are, have a look and see, whether you think it could be vaginal atrophy in the same way as we feel our breasts and we say there's a lump here or whatever. I think having knowledge so that we can actually have a very educated conversation with our doctors actually means we can help them help us
Yeah.
better.
No, I couldn't agree more. I always say it's like you need to manage your doctor in a similar way how you would probably manage if you go to someone to get a mortgage, right? Because only with the input you're giving them can they kind of give you information back. Yeah, but I think awareness is so important.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and the knowledge and everything that you've gone through. And as you said, it's really important that we talk about these subjects and lift the taboo on women's health. And it's only if we start talking about it that I think we can help women everywhere to become comfortable with their bodies and what's happening with them. So I'm really hoping that you talking about this will have helped some women worry less
Me
because you
too.
decided to share more. And if there's anyone who's listening who is experiencing any vaginal issues, then we urge you to not only educate yourself, but to go and get medical attention and get it looked at as quickly as possible. And if there's anyone out there who is suffering from this and would like to talk about it further, then please send us an email. And what we'd like to do is put together a webinar with our guests today and other sufferers of vaginal atrophy and an expert so that you can talk together and share your stories and experiences, because we said we know how important that is to do and be able to do it in a safe space. So if you have a story you'd like to share with us on any subject that affects us as women, then also please reach out to us as well and help show other women that they're not alone in their worries. Thank you.
Thank you.